I wasn't expecting anyone to answer the door that quickly. One knock, and there she was. She didn't look like anyone's aunt. Not the way I'd pictured when my neighbors said she was visiting for a few weeks. She was standing there in a loose cream sweater that slipped off one shoulder, hair slightly damp like she just stepped out of the shower. Mid-40s, maybe? But the kind of mid-40s that made you forget numbers existed. "You've grown since I last saw you," she said, leaning on the frame, voice low like it had no reason to hurry. I almost laughed, but it stuck somewhere in my throat. "So have you," I said. Her smile was small, not shy, more like she was testing something. The reason I was there was stupid. My neighbor's sink had flooded, and I'd offered to help fix it. But instead of my neighbor, I was standing in front of her aunt, who somehow made the smell of damp wood and bleach feel like the background of something dangerous. Inside, the kitchen light was warm and uneven. She pointed toward the sink and said, "Tools are under there." But she didn't leave the room. She stayed, leaning against the counter, watching me kneel down and start working. Every few minutes, I caught her moving, just small things. Adjusting her sweater, brushing her hair back, crossing her arms and then uncrossing them. Not nervous, just aware. "I'm sorry," she said after a while. "I don't remember your name," I told her. She repeated it slowly, like she was tasting it. Then she asked how long I'd been living next door, what I did for work, if I still played basketball like I used to. Her memory of me was strange, like she'd been storing little details from years ago without realizing it. When I glanced up, she was closer than before. Not too close, just close enough that I could smell something faint, maybe vanilla, maybe just warm laundry. The pipe under the sink was stubborn, and I muttered something about it being old. She crouched down next to me, knees almost brushing mine, her hand on the cabinet door. I could feel the heat of her through the space between us. "You're good with your hands," she said, without looking at me. The words hung there too long. I tightened the last bolt, sat back on my heels, and said, "All done." She straightened up, and I followed. In the cramped kitchen, the air felt heavier now. She handed me a towel without asking if I needed one. Our fingers touched, light, almost nothing. But neither of us moved right away. There was something in her eyes, like she was deciding whether to step back or let the moment sit. I realized my breathing had changed, slow and deliberate, matching hers. "Thank you," she said, but softer than before. I should have left. I didn't. Instead, I leaned against the counter opposite her, wiping my hands even though they were already dry. She glanced at the clock, then back at me. "Do you want some coffee?" It should have been nothing, just coffee. But the way she asked it, like it meant something else entirely, made the space between us suddenly feel very small. And then, before I could answer, the sound of the front door opening cut through the room. Her eyes flicked toward the noise, then back to me. And she smiled, slow, knowing, like she just decided something neither of us could undo. The sound of the front door shutting carried down the hall, followed by muffled voices. She didn't look away from me right away, just let that small, knowing smile fade into something unreadable. "That's my sister," she said, almost like an afterthought. "She's probably gone to take a call." Her voice was calmer now, but it felt like she was quietly bracing for something. I followed her into the living room, where the light from the half-closed blinds cut across her face in soft stripes. She moved a stack of books from the couch and gestured for me to sit. I noticed one of them, a novel with a dog-eared page about halfway through. A coffee mug sat on the table next to it, cold and forgotten. "You look exactly like your mother," she said suddenly. I blinked. "You knew her?" "Years ago. Before you were this." Her gaze traveled over me briefly before she caught herself and looked down. Something about the way she said it, the careful pause, the almost slip, made my chest feel tight. I didn't know whether she meant older or something else entirely. She sat across from me but leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "I'm sorry. I'm a little off today. I just ended something. A long something." It was the first real crack in her voice. Not enough to make it break, but enough to make me want to step into it. I found myself studying her the way you do when you know you'll remember it later, the faint crease near her left eye when she squints against the light, the way she curls her fingers under her palm when she's thinking. There was a loose strand of hair that kept falling toward her cheek, and I caught myself wanting to reach out and fix it. "It's fine," I said quietly. "You don't have to explain." Her eyes flicked to mine. "I'm not explaining. I'm just saying it out loud for the first time." We sat in a pause that felt longer than it was. I could hear the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen, the distant ticking of a clock on the wall. She reached for her mug, realized it was cold, and put it back down. "Do you ever feel like you're supposed to be somewhere else, but you're glad you're not?" I didn't answer right away. Her voice dropped a little. "You should stay for coffee. Fresh this time." It was such a small thing, but the way her hand landed on my arm when she said it made my thoughts scatter. Warm. Steady. No hesitation. I nodded without thinking. She smiled, not the testing kind from earlier, but one that felt like it carried weight. And I knew, without her saying a word, that leaving wasn't going to be the hardest part of this. The coffee machine hissed softly in the kitchen, the sound filling the spaces where words might have gone. She moved around with quiet efficiency, reaching for the mugs, measuring out the grounds, but every motion felt deliberate, unhurried. I sat at the small table, pretending to study the worn wood grain, though my eyes kept following her. The way the sweater slipped again from her shoulder. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear only for it to fall right back. She glanced at me once over her shoulder. "You're quiet." "I'm just thinking." "About what?" I could have lied. I should have lied. Instead, I said, "About this." Her hand stilled for a fraction of a second before she reached for the kettle. "This?" But she didn't press further. She poured the coffee and brought the mugs over, setting one in front of me. Our fingers brushed again, not the fleeting accident from earlier, but something longer, intentional enough that neither of us could pretend otherwise. I wrapped my hand around the mug like it could ground me. "I shouldn't," I started, but the words knotted in my throat. "You shouldn't what?" she asked, leaning just slightly forward. There was a knock at the door. We both froze. She didn't move right away, just kept her eyes on me like she was trying to decide whether to answer it. Finally, she pushed back her chair and went to the door, leaving it half open behind her. A man's voice drifted in, casual, neighborly, asking if her sister was around. She answered politely, but there was a clipped undertone, the kind you use when you want someone gone quickly. After a brief exchange, the door shut again. When she returned, she didn't sit across from me this time. She took the seat next to mine, close enough that her knee brushed mine under the table. "That was," she started, but stopped herself. She smiled faintly, shaking her head. "Never mind." I could smell the coffee, rich and sharp, but it was nothing compared to the faint scent of her warm skin, something floral I couldn't name. I told myself to pull back, to steer the conversation somewhere safe. But my gaze slipped to her mouth, and when I looked back up, she was already watching me. She didn't look away. "You have no idea," she said quietly, "how different you are now." It was almost nothing, just words. but they landed in a place I hadn't known was exposed until that moment. I swallowed, forcing myself to take a sip of coffee I'd barely tasted. And then she shifted in her chair, her hand brushing against mine again, lingering. This time, neither of us moved away. The coffee had gone cold again. Neither of us seemed to notice. She was still sitting close, her knee pressed lightly against mine, her fingers resting near enough that I could feel their warmth. It was the kind of closeness that wasn't accidental anymore. "You keep looking at me like that," she said softly. "Like what?" "Like you're not sure if you should be here, or if you never want to leave." Her voice was calm, but the air between us tightened. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Maybe both." She didn't smile this time. She just studied me, her eyes tracing my face as if she was memorizing something. "You're not the boy I remember. And you're not the woman I thought you were." For a moment that hung between us, too heavy, too direct. I could hear the faint hum of a car passing outside, the tick of the wall clock marking every second neither of us looked away. Her hand shifted on the table, brushing mine again. This time, I turned my palm so our fingers caught, barely touching, but enough. She glanced down at them, then back up at me. "This isn't a good idea," she said, but the way her thumb moved against my hand betrayed her words. "I know." My voice was low. "Doesn't mean I don't want it." Her breath hitched, almost too quietly to hear. I wanted to say something else, something that would either pull us back from the edge or push us right over it. But before I could, the sound of her phone vibrating on the counter broke the moment. She stood slowly, her hand slipping from mine. She picked up the phone, looked at the screen, and set it back down without answering. Then she turned, leaning against the counter, watching me like she was weighing a decision that could undo everything. "I don't know what's worse," she said finally. "Wanting this, or knowing you do too." The honesty in it made my chest feel tight. I stood, the chair legs scraping softly against the floor, and crossed the small space between us. I stopped just short of touching her, the kind of distance where every inch mattered. Her eyes flicked to my mouth, then back up. She didn't move away. Either of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty, it was full, loaded, waiting. Finally, she asked, almost in a whisper, "If I asked you to stay, would you? If I asked you to stay, would you?" The question still hung in the air when I heard the sound of the front door again. Not a knock this time, the latch turning, footsteps coming in. Her head turned sharply toward the hallway. I stepped back, almost instinctively, but not fast enough. A voice called out, "Aunt Claire? You here?" I froze. The name hit me first. Aunt Claire. And then the rest of it clicked. My neighbor's sister wasn't the only one in this house. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced at me with something between warning and apology. "In here," she finally called out. My neighbor, the guy I'd known since high school, stepped into the kitchen, his eyes flicking between us. He grinned. "Hey, man. Didn't know you two knew each other." Claire smiled easily, the kind of smile that covered everything it needed to. "He was helping with the sink." "Yeah?" My neighbor looked at me, then back at her. "Guess you've known him longer than I have. Mom said you used to babysit him, right?" The words hit like a cold splash of water. Babysit. I felt heat crawl up the back of my neck. Claire didn't flinch. "Once or twice. A long time ago." I searched her face for any sign of what she was feeling, but all I saw was the calm, steady expression of someone who had just sealed the door shut. My neighbor grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and headed back out, saying he'd be in the garage. The moment he was gone, the air shifted again, heavier now, but in a different way. She leaned against the counter, arms folded. Well, I guess that's out in the open. I tried to speak, but my voice caught. Babysit? She didn't look away. You were 8. Maybe 9. Your mother trusted me. I moved away before you turned 12. Memories I hadn't thought about in years flickered, a taller woman at the kitchen table helping me with homework, the smell of cinnamon tea, her laugh when I spilled juice on my shirt. I shook my head slightly. That changes things. Does it? She asked quietly. I didn't know. I didn't know if it made everything that had just happened feel more wrong, or more inevitable. Her expression softened, just a fraction. You're not that boy anymore. My pulse was still uneven, my thoughts scattered. And you're not the woman I remember. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then she stepped closer again, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the pull, the gravity of it. Her voice was low. So tell me, does that make this harder for you to walk away from? Or easier? Her question sat between us like a lit match. Harder to walk away from, or easier? I swallowed, my mouth dry. Harder. Her gaze didn't waver. Then why are you still standing over there? I stepped forward slowly, as if testing the air, each inch closing the gap between us. I could feel the warmth coming off her skin before I even reached her. This is wrong, I said, my voice low. I know, she replied. And then, softer. But tell me you don't want it. I didn't. Couldn't. The truth was written all over me, and we both knew it. Her hand came up, brushing lightly against my jaw, a barely there touch, hesitant but deliberate. My breath caught, and for a second, everything else in the room, the clock, the fridge hum, the faint voices outside, just dissolved. You have no idea how much I've tried to keep this polite, she whispered. That word, polite, felt strange, almost bitter on her tongue, as though the whole evening had been her fighting herself. Then stop, I said, before I could think better of it. Her eyes searched mine for a beat, maybe 2, and then she stepped into me, her forehead resting against mine. It wasn't a kiss. Not yet. It was heavier than that, like both of us were standing on the very edge and waiting for the other to take the drop first. I shouldn't have let you stay this long, she murmured. You could still tell me to leave, I said. Her hand slid down my arm, fingers curling around my wrist, not holding me in place, but not letting me go either. And you'd listen? I didn't answer. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was full, of all the years between us, all the things either of us had planned on feeling, all the rules that had already been broken by standing this close. Finally, she exhaled. I'm tired of pretending this isn't happening. That was it. No grand confession, no rehearsed words. Just the truth, bare and simple. I leaned in then, not all the way, but enough that she could close the gap if she wanted. And she did, just a brush of lips at first, slow and uncertain, then deeper when neither of us pulled away. When we finally did, she kept her hand on my wrist, her thumb tracing lightly over my skin. If you stay, she said, there's no going back. I looked at her, really looked, the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the steady rise and fall of her chest, the way she wasn't blinking. I'm not leaving, I said. Her smile was small, almost private. Then don't. The house was quieter now. The late afternoon light had shifted to something warmer, heavier, the kind of light that made you aware of how close the day was to ending. We were still in the kitchen, though the coffee had gone untouched. She leaned back against the counter, arms loose at her sides now, not folded like before. I stood close enough to feel her there, but far enough that the moment could still be mistaken for something else, if either of us needed it to be. Neither of us did. I didn't expect you to say yes, she admitted. You didn't really give me a choice, I said, half a smile tugging at my mouth. Her eyes narrowed, but not with annoyance. I gave you every chance to leave. You didn't take it. She was right. I could have walked out the moment the sink was fixed. Could have said I had somewhere to be, made an excuse about dinner, let the whole thing dissolve into something we'd both pretend didn't happen. Instead, I'd stayed. And not just because of her. It was because somewhere in the middle of her steady gaze and the way she'd said "I'm tired of pretending," I'd realized I didn't want to be the version of myself that always backed away from things that mattered. I'm not the kid you remember, I said. I know. She stepped forward, close enough that the edge of her sweater brushed my arm. Her expression had softened, but there was still that trace of guardedness, a habit she might never fully lose. Then what happens now? I asked. Her answer was simple. Now we see where this goes. Without hiding. It wasn't a promise of forever. It wasn't even a promise of next week. But it was real, and in that moment, it was enough. We moved to the living room after that, not in a rush. She curled into the corner of the couch, legs tucked under her, and I sat beside her. No more testing the space between us. The evening wore on in small, unremarkable ways, the TV murmuring in the background, her hand resting lightly on my knee, the quiet of knowing we didn't have to fill every silence. Somewhere in all of it, I thought about the years between us, about the boy she'd once looked after and the man sitting beside her now. I thought about how thin the line had been between walking away and staying, and how close I'd come to missing this entirely. Not everything that feels wrong is. Sometimes it's just unexpected. And sometimes, if you're willing to let it, it changes you. When I finally stood to leave that night, she didn't ask me when I'd be back. She just said, "You know where I am." And I did. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?